In front of me I have a pair of very special transistor radios. These are Regency TR-1s. The Regency TR-1 was the very first transistor radio model ever produced. It hit the market in October of 1954 at a price of $49.95. Fairly expensive for the time, but more expensive radios were yet to come. I think the designers of the cabinet of this radio did an excellent job. It's a beautiful minimalist design, simple to produce, but also quite elegant. This red example here is the earlier of the pair, and this white one here is from the end of Regency TR-1 production. There are differences both inside and outside of these radios. The most obvious cosmetic difference between these two is that the Regency logo is molded into the case on this one, and then was filled with paint, whereas it was heat stamped on this one, which tends to wear off. This earlier one also has no coin slot on the bottom, whereas this one does. But otherwise the cases are essentially identical. These have a beautiful gold metallic grille, although this one has suffered from some battery corrosion that ate away some of the metallic fibers in there. Been looking for a replacement for this, but haven't found a suitable one yet. Neither of these radios is fully working, but the white one does work somewhat. Now, based on the coin slot on the bottom, you'd probably think that you should open this radio from the bottom, but that's actually not a good idea. You can see this one is cracked, while the red one is in perfect condition in that regard. The best place to open these radios is from the side. Press in gently on the top half of the case, and then with your fingernail pry the back off. The case has tabs on the sides, but not on the top or bottom. That's why it's best to open it from the side, so you don't damage the case. But be very careful. These cabinets are quite brittle, and they're fairly thin. Early Regency TR-1 cabinets have a little dimple here, and that dimple is for the screw on the back of the tuning capacitor. This one has a date code of 447, which is the 47th week of 1954. So this is a 1954 TR-1 in all likelihood, though probably towards the end of it, if not early 1955, because the serial number is 28,263, and they apparently did start at serial number 1. This radio has all its original components, including these very unreliable tubular electrolytic capacitors. 2 of them are the white ceramic type, which tend to crack, although I don't see any cracks on these 2. And the other 2 are the tubular phenolic type, which seem to be no more reliable than the ceramic ones, although they at least don't crack. I did oil the tuning capacitor on this one, because I don't want the bearings to rust. But as I said, it doesn't play at all. I suspect that at least the output transistor is bad. You can see that they have been color-coded, with both a solid color and a dot color marking in some cases. That sort of thing was fairly common on very early transistors, but became much less common later on. And here's the inside of the white one. You can see there are some circuit differences. You notice there's quite a few more resistors here than there are on this early one. And there's no paint coating on the transistors, but they do have a number stamped on them. Well, except for this one up here. This one is serial number 141,943. It's from after Regency started producing the TR-1G. You'll notice that the G is just crossed out on this paper label, which is loose. I haven't re-glued it. And there's no dimple for the tuning capacitor, because the tuning capacitor no longer has that set screw there. It has a date code of 649, so the 49th week of 1956. Quite late for one of these, like I said. The volume control is also slightly different. It's a bit hard to see, but there's a silver-plated sort of cup-shaped piece attached to the shaft of the volume control, and that contact there makes contact with it. Since this was the very first transistor radio, suitable miniature volume controls with a switch just weren't available apparently, and they had to make their own. There's a cam on the volume control knob that lifts up that little metal tab there and breaks the circuit. The volume controls are often quite worn, and this one is no exception because it actually is a bit hard to turn the radio on and off. And to turn it on, you turn it this way. You'll notice that this volume control knob has a dot here, which lines up with that dot to tell you it's off. The older TR-1 does not have that. Someone added a little bit of white paint there, probably nail polish. That's not original though. The earlier switch design has a pair of contacts and is a bit harder to turn off. The later design is smoother turning. Both of them have an earphone jack. I unfortunately don't have the original earphone though. Now let's hear the white one play. It's very, very quiet, so you're going to be barely able to hear it. These radios were designed to take a 22-volt hearing aid battery. The now familiar 9-volt transistor radio batteries were not available yet. I'm not sure exactly what year they came out. You can see that would fit in here, but it would be shorting out on this tab, and it wouldn't be the right voltage either. One downside of this style of battery is that it can be accidentally installed the wrong way around, which would definitely damage the transistors in this radio, and maybe that's what happened to the red one. I've got my bench supply set up and adjusted for 20 volts. So I'll hook the negative up and the positive, and then I will switch it on. Turn the volume all the way up. You can faintly hear some baseball there. And some more sports talk. And that's about it. This radio has all its original electrolytic capacitors. All of them are the white ceramic type. 3 of them are marked Nashville, and 1 of them is marked Electric Cond. Probably says IEI on the other side. In any case, these are very unreliable, and likely every single one of these is basically open circuit. Here's a pair of Regency TR-1 cases. This black one was likely intended for a Regency TR-1G, which was available in black. This case is unmarked, but it is definitely a Regency TR-1 case. You can see that unusual hole for the earphone is cut exactly the same. Unfortunately, neither of these has the earphone. They both have tuck-tight fasteners, which seem to have been quite popular on transistor radio cases in the 50s. It's made of very thick top-grain cowhide leather. Although neither of them is actually marked as such, you can tell this is high-quality leather. This one's a little dry. Could use some leather conditioner. I believe I conditioned this one years ago. I thought I had the original manual that came with the radios, but I could not find it. I did find this Sam's Photo Fact for the Regency TR-1 though. Here's the circuit. It's a relatively simple one. One interesting thing to note here is the IF frequency is 262 kHz. Most later transistor radios used a IF frequency of 455 kHz, although this frequency was common on automotive transistor radios. As I understand it, this frequency was used because the early transistors performed better at lower frequencies. Later transistors didn't have that limitation and could use a higher IF frequency. The radio has a single output transistor, and the input to the base is coupled by this 2 millifarad capacitor from the volume control. Replacing this one capacitor would probably improve the volume on the white radio, and I am tempted to do so to hear a bit more of what this radio can do. However, you've got to keep in mind that this is the very first transistor radio, and even at the time it was not considered a good performer. In fact, Consumer Reports gave it a poor rating in just about every single category. But when it comes to electronics, the first is rarely the best, and anything other than perhaps looks. Within just a few years, transistor radios were able to rival the performance of portable tube radios, and came to dominate the market. While tube portables were available a few years before these radios were, and their performance in terms of sensitivity and selectivity was much better, they had very little audio output power. They consumed a lot of current from their very expensive batteries, specifically the B battery, which is usually a 45 volt battery that looks like a longer version of a 9 volt battery. And they were sensitive to microphonics, so you couldn't be swinging the radio around while you were listening to it, otherwise you'd be hearing all sorts of ringing noises. I plan to leave this red one as it is. This is a significant historical piece, and the circuitry is a big part of that historical value, in my opinion. But I might fix up this white one, as its cabinet is in kind of poor condition, and it's a later example anyway. We shall see. If I do, I'll make another video. If you need to take a Regency TR-1 apart, disassembly is actually fairly simple. First, open the cabinet, as I did before. Then, unscrew the little thumb screw holding in the dial. Lift off the dial. And underneath you'll find 3 screws. The only one you need to remove is this one here. The other 2 hold the tuning capacitor in place to the chassis. With this one little screw out, the top cover just lifts right off. See, the grill on this one is in perfect condition, although the rest of the cabinet is unfortunately not. It's got some cracks here and some cracks on the top, as I showed before. And here's the chassis. It appears to be cadmium plated steel. It's got that kind of greenish tinge on it. I believe that greenish tinge is a mix of cadmium sulfide and cadmium oxide. Be careful, it does come off on your fingers and is toxic. I usually wipe that sort of stuff off with a wet paper towel. To disassemble the radio further, you have to separate the phenolic circuit board from the metal chassis. You can see there's already a crack here. Phenolic is fairly brittle and it's pretty easy to damage, so be quite careful with that. You'd kind of have to push these caps out of the way to undo the little twists in the metal tab there. I'm not going to do that because I'm not intending to fix this radio right now. The label inside the newer radio is much larger than the one inside the early one. And the main edition is this section on factory service. The radio came with a 90-day warranty, which is fairly short for the time. And they also offered repairs after the warranty period for a cost of $5, which was of course more money in 1954 than it is now. But not necessarily a terrible price. It seems these radios fairly frequently ran into issues during the time period that they were being used, as it's fairly common to see a sticker on the inside that says something along the lines of repaired by Regency. I suspect that this red one had one of those stickers and then it was later removed. You can see the remains of some glue here and maybe a bit of the outline of a sticker. It's hard to say for sure. Early transistors weren't all that reliable, and these early miniature capacitors had terrible reliability. It's not that uncommon to see replacements of these types of capacitors that appear to have been installed in the 1960s in 1950s radios. Well, thanks for watching.